All right, be frank with you. This is kind of controversial stuff, right? Especially in Alabama. Let's look at it from this perspective. Most biologists, not everyone, but a lot of them are atheists, right? They don't believe in supernatural creation. So where did that first life come from is something, a question that everybody wants an answer to. This is the best biological, scientific explanation we have. Now it's called a hypothesis. Why is it not a theory or law? What's the difference between a hypothesis and a theory? It's really hard to test. We can't replicate those initial conditions. This guy Operin is the main guy who's credited with this idea. His idea was, hey, here's some gases that were in the early atmosphere. Maybe methane, ammonia, hydrogen, water vapor. There's these gases out there. They think the early Earth was a pretty rough place. There might have been a lot of lightning. There's a lot of UV radiation coming in from the sun, a lot of energy. And over time, supposedly these inorganic molecules and this energy from lightning and UV radiation reacted together and formed some very basic organic molecules. The most basic organic molecules a lot, really we need to think about two things. Amino acids, which are the building blocks for what? Proteins. And nucleotides, which are the building blocks for what? What's a nucleotide building piece for? Way back to regular biology, you want to know this. What's a nucleic acid? It's like DNA, RNA. The nucleotide is the building blocks for DNA and RNA, and also ATP, which turns out to be really important too. Here's the big jump. You've got these organic chemicals that have formed in the water, the oceans of the world. We call that the organic soup because there's all these organic molecules floating around in the water. And somehow, the theory is that somehow those organic molecules somehow came together to form the first living thing, which would have been what? A prokaryote, bacteria. What the article you read was called a protobiont. It's a bacteria basically. Prokaryote. Now that's a big jump. I'm not asking you to believe this, but I am asking you to be able to explain it. I'm not trying to change your beliefs about creation, but you need to be able to explain this idea. This is Operin's hypothesis. Now, this is probably the first time you've heard that name Operin, but you have heard in your Moodle assignment about Stanley Miller in the Miller-Urey experiment. Miller and Urey wanted to sort of provide some support for Operin's idea, some scientific evidence that maybe this could have happened. So they took a network of flasks, hooked them together, and filled those flasks with the gases that they thought were in the Earth's primitive atmosphere. Again, methane. What's methane better known to you guys as? What's more common name for methane? Natural gas. You make it, other things make it, right? It's very common on Earth. It's a good energy source. There used to be a lot of it in the atmosphere, apparently. Ammonia. What's the formula for ammonia? Chemistry people. NH3. Everybody, you be a chemistry person. NH3, you find that in like Windex and other cleaners, right? Your body also makes it when you eat a lot of meat, proteins. Water and hydrogen. So they put these gases in these containers. They put in something like a spark plug that would emit pretty constant sparks of electricity, spark those gases. What they were able to find after a certain amount of time is in the water that was in the container, they found some organic molecules, some amino acids. So that part of the hypothesis seemed to be plausible. That if you had these gases and you had electricity, some energy source, maybe UV light, that you could create organic molecules, specifically amino acids. Other experiments showed nucleotides could be formed made basically the same way. So this was Operin's organic soup. That part was possible. Now, no one's ever been able to generate what in that kind of container? The next step would have been some kind of primitive living thing, right? And that's really untestable. The idea that that would have happened over millions of years. There's a problem, though, with this Miller-Urey experiment. Any idea what the problem is today? Well, a lot of biologists sort of discount it today. You're going to read more about this in this next little time. A lot of biologists today think that those gases were not the gases that were probably in the early atmosphere. I think the atmosphere is probably very different than that. They've sort of changed their opinion on what the gases were. So if these were not the correct gases, then this whole idea sort of gets shot, right? We don't really know it. It's a hypothesis. But you should be able to explain what O'Brien's hypothesis is, what its purpose is, to describe where the first one came from, and be able to talk about the basics of the Miller-Urey experiment. We need to know what its basic setup was and what did it show. This idea that we can get a living thing from nothing. What's the name for that idea? That you can get life from not living things. You know, you heard about this in regular biology. Anybody know the word I'm looking for here? It's called spontaneous generation. And we're about to talk about cells here in a second. One of the core ideas of the cell theory is that living things can only come from what? Other living things. Except for here, that's exception to the rule. That's spontaneous generation. Questions about this Miller-Urey thing? Trying to back O'Brien's hypothesis that the gases in the early atmosphere could have come together with some energy from lightning or UV light to make organic molecules like amino acids. And that somehow this soupy organic water could give birth to the first living thing, probably a bacteria, prokaryote. Everybody can explain that?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So it's saying that the gases in the early atmosphere formed with the energy, like with lightning and UV gases or UV rays, and then made the soup.
Which would have like amino acids in it and nucleotides to make a cell.
Okay.
It's a big jump. Well, like I said, I'm not asking you to necessarily buy that. I'm asking you to be able to explain it. All right, where we left off in class the other day was talking about cell membranes. And I want to make sure we get that finished up before we get out here today. It's pretty much what we need to know about cell membranes. We talked about another name for it is the plasma membrane. It's pretty much the same in every known living thing. It's one of those conserved properties. We talked about its functions. When you think about the cell membrane, I want you to think about regulation. Regulation of what can go in and what gets pushed out, right, of the cell. Because it is picky about what can go in and what can come out, what adjective might we use to describe it? Cell membrane. Because only certain things can go in and out. Selectively permeable, or we might shorten that up a little bit too. Semi-permeable. Selectively permeable or semi-permeable. Only certain things can get in and out. Those are important terms to know. The biggest part of that cell membrane is made out of these chemicals called phospholipids, which you had 2 questions about on your quiz today. I'm going to go to a picture first. Here's a phospholipid. Now, when we first looked at this picture, I told you need to be able to draw it the next day in class. I don't want you to be able to draw it, but I do want you to recognize it if you see it. This is the actual chemical. A lot of times you see it drawn, though, like this. The reason for that, phospholipid is built around this core called glycerol. It's an alcohol. It's got 3 carbons in it. And attached up to 2 of those carbons are these long chains, essentially of just carbons and hydrogens. It's kind of boring. That's the same basic structure as like gasoline or oil. It's a hydrocarbon. Kind of boring because there's none of what kind of atoms in there. It might make it a little more interesting. Where are the really interesting atoms in the periodic table? The ones that make chemicals have a little more name. Top right. Nitrogen, oxygen, mainly in living things, those two. But fluorine and chlorine too. What do those four things have in common? They're said to be very what? No, not so much flammable. No. Nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, and chlorine. What do they have in common? Give me a little more exactness than that. Electro what? Not magnetic. Joel, you know electro what? Electronegative. Make sure you know what electronegativity is. If you don't, right now, make sure you get a definition right now. Most of the binds in living things, the binds that hold chemicals together, what kind of binds are they? Two kinds of binds you learned about in chemistry. Covalent and ionic. Most of the binds in living things, which one of those two are? Mostly covalent. In covalent bonds, what happens with electrons to make a bond? You share them. Electronegative atoms take part in covalent bonds, and they'll share electrons, but they don't share evenly. It's sort of like if Alex and I were sharing a bag of candy, and I said, Alex, here's one for you, two for me. One for you, two for me. That's kind of the way electronegative atoms do. When they share electrons with another atom, the electrons that they're sharing get pulled closer to the electronegative atom and further from the non-electronegative atom. When you do that, you're pulling negatives closer to yourself, which means overall your side of the molecule becomes what charge? If you're an electronegative atom. If Joey here is an electronegative atom, and we formed a bond here, that out of the way, and these are our pair of electrons. We're sharing them. Grab them there, Joey. We're sharing those. But notice whose hands they're in. These are negatives. One of those negatives was my negative, right? She pulled it way over there. What happens to me as an atom because she pulled my electron over there? I become a little bit positive, slightly positive. She didn't take that electron, or technically she shares it with me, right? But it's closer to her than it is to me. So I become slightly positive, and she becomes slightly negative. And we're a molecule together. What do we call a molecule like that? It has a negative side and a positive side. Like water, for example. What's the name for a molecule that has a negative side and a positive side? Polar. Polar. So electronegative atoms typically will cause molecules that they're in to become polar. That's an important idea. Checking in? Thank you, man. Questions on that? Make sure you know what electronegativity is. When an atom that's electronegative shares electrons with another atom, it has a higher attraction for those electrons. And oftentimes, electronegativity causes the molecules that those atoms are in to become polar, charged. That's important up here. These fatty acids down at the bottom don't really have any electronegative atoms. So they're not charged, not polar. Up here at the top, notice there's a lot of oxygen up here. There's also some nitrogen. Those are in that top right-hand corner. So the top part is charged, polar. The bottom part is not. Polar molecules like what kind of molecules? They like to be around what kind of molecules? Polar. Polar likes polar. Non-polar likes non-polar. So when you stick these things in water, water's really polar. These things want to be near water. These want to be as far away from water as they can get. These are hydrophobic, fearing water. These are hydrophilic, loving water. What's the word that we just had on the quiz for a molecule that has a side that's charged and a side that's not charged? amphipathic. Phospholipids are amphipathic, both polar and nonpolar at the same time. Just another quick word. Water. Water is both acidic and basic at the same time. Anybody know the word for that? My chemistry people? A chemical that can be both an acid and a base at the same time? Just a word, an adjective for it. Water is an example. It's the same basic root as what we just looked at. Sometimes they're called amphoteric. And that means both acid and base. Not a term you really need to know for right now, but just tied in that AMPH root. Means both. Let's go to another picture before we go any further. This is what the cell membrane, the biggest part of it, looks like. Phospholipid bilayer. Here it looks linear. It's really spherical, right? It's going to be a closed like ball with these heads. This is the phosphate polar areas, always toward water, outside the cell and inside the cell. And the phospholipids in the middle, away from the water as far as they can be, toward each other. Even though we say the cell membrane is both polar and nonpolar, what's the biggest part of it? Look at that picture. What's the biggest part? The nonpolar middle part, right? That's important to think about because what kinds of things can go through that without much of a problem? What kinds of things can go through nonpolar things without a problem? Other nonpolar things. Nonpolar things can zip in and out pretty much wherever they need to. Polar things, on the other hand, are ions like Na plus or K plus. Those things get near that nonpolar part, and what happens? What happens when a polar thing gets near a nonpolar thing? What happens when an oil gets near water? They're repelled, they're separated. So polar things have a hard time getting in and out of that phospholipid bilayer. They can't go through the phospholipids. There needs to be another way, and we're about to talk about what that other way is. Other things that have a hard time getting through there are large things, like proteins, for example. There are a lot of large molecules, and there's also a lot of ions that your cells need inside. So there has to be another way to get those in and out. And that's what we'll talk about right now. Let's backtrack a couple slides. Most of the cell membrane is made out of phospholipids, but also stuck into those phospholipid bilayers, embedded in them, are lots of proteins. Proteins, remember, we said are answer to every question in this class. They give functions to certain things. They give them the ability to do things. An important kind of protein in that cell membrane is called a channel protein. Sometimes you might hear it called a transport protein. There's several adjectives that might describe it. Why would your cell membrane need channels? Channels for what? Channels for polar things, or maybe big things that need to get in and out of a cell. You've probably heard in regular biology of a way to move things in and out of a cell called facilitated diffusion. Or you might have heard of something called active transport. These transport proteins help to move things in and out of the cell. Things that can't go through the phospholipid bilayer very easily. Also in that cell membrane is another group of proteins. They're sometimes called glycoproteins. You might also hear them called marker proteins. You might hear them called name tags. You might even hear them called glycocalyx. All these terms I'm going to use interchangeably, at least to some extent. Glycoproteins can also have some other functions. But in terms of the cell, why would your cells need a name tag? What do my cells need to tell, hey, this is me? Immune system. So that your immune system knows what's you and what isn't. That's important. Sometimes you get confused. What do we call it when someone's immune system gets confused? Starts attacking your own cells. What category of diseases? This is really important. What category of diseases happen when someone's immune system gets confused and starts attacking itself? No, not so much cancer. They call it autoimmune diseases. Anybody know an example? No, AIDS is a viral thing. Second. You can have problems with your thyroid. What I'm thinking is like, you guys know rheumatoid arthritis? You heard of rheumatoid arthritis? You see these people with like gnarly fingers and their fingers are all twisted and bent. It's their immune system attacking the joints. Now I'm not talking about regular arthritis. Osteoarthritis happens just when you're worn out your joints. They're just like people who play football, for example, usually have bad knees. Rheumatoid arthritis, on the other hand, is when your immune system literally attacking your joints. It happens to really young people. Another autoimmune disease is lupus, or lupus. All kinds of weird symptoms of lupus. There are lots and lots of these autoimmune diseases. Who's mostly affected by autoimmune disease? What category of people? Kind of scary that your body starts attacking itself, but it's almost always, I won't say always, but way more common in women than in men. And why? Still not really sure. But most autoimmune diseases happen to women. Anyway, that's the sidebar. Realize that you need markers to communicate with your white blood cells to say, hey, this belongs to me, don't damage it. There are also glycoproteins that help to tell your white blood cells when a certain cell is sick. If I have a sick cell with viruses inside it, what should I want to happen to that cell? If one of my cells is sick, it's got viruses inside it, what should I want to happen to that cell? I want it killed. Because if I don't kill it, what's going to pop out pretty soon? Lots and lots of viruses, and they're going to spread. So there are certain glycoproteins, when we get to the immune system we'll talk about, that basically tell your blood cells, hey, this cell's sick, kill it. It's like a killing out signal. We'll get to how that works a little bit later. Another thing I want to mention are receptors. Sometimes these glycoproteins can also serve as receptors. What would a cell need a receptor for? What do cells need to receive? Say again? Hormones, signals. A hormone is a signal in your body. It's a chemical signal. It's a message. And your cells need to be able to pick those up. Is every cell in your body affected by every hormone in your body? Nope. It can only be affected if it has what? If my phone was ringing right now, and I don't answer it, it doesn't really affect me, right? A hormone only works. It only affects the cell if that cell has the appropriate receptor. Let's say this is the receptor sticking out the surface of my cell. This is the hormone. When those two things come together, that's a signal to tell my cell to do something. For example, let's say this is a receptor for testosterone. And I'm a muscle cell. My whole body's a muscle cell. This is a receptor for testosterone. Here comes testosterone. They get together. What's the message to that muscle cell? What does testosterone tell your muscles to do? Get bigger, get thicker. Maybe it's a vocal cord in your throat. Testosterone receptor, testosterone. What does it tell those vocal cords to do? Why is my voice like this? And you ladies is not. Or not. It makes it get thicker, and therefore your voice gets deeper. Do you ladies have receptors for testosterone in your cells? Yep. You just don't have what? You just don't have much testosterone. Well, let's say Joy here decided she wanted to be an Olympic weightlifter. And she's going to cheat because Joy's kind of small. So she starts, what's she going to take to become a really good Olympic weightlifter? Steroids or testosterone, essentially, right? She's always had receptors for testosterone. Just the testosterone, you ladies have a little bit, but not much. Wasn't there. But now she starts taking steroids. The message to her muscles is what? Get bigger, get thicker. The message to her vocal cords is also what? Get deeper. The message to her hair follicles is what? Grow. So Joey's going to become the bearded, muscular lady. She's probably going to win, all right? Now, there was a big controversy in this past Olympics. Some of you watch the Olympics pretty regularly. In the 800-meter dash, the women's 800-meter dash. Anybody watch that race? Anybody know the controversy I'm talking about? There was a woman. Her name was, she was from South Africa. Her name was Caster Semenya, I think. I'll put a picture up of this lady in a minute. You look at a picture of her, and if you don't know she's a woman, you're pretty sure she's a man. Really muscular, arms that I would love to have, like a 12-pack, abs. I mean, just muscle them. Looks like a man. Turns out, guess what? What was the controversy? She really was a man in some ways. Genetically, this person was born with an X and a Y chromosome. What does that mean? Good God. But when she came out, the doctor said, congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Semenya, you have a baby daughter. Everything on the outside was female. Genetically, XY. How come? She has genetic disease. Your receptors are proteins. What controls the way your proteins look and act? Your DNA. She had a mutation, and her receptors were made the wrong way. So that even though she was making testosterone, the receptors weren't picking up the message the right way. Turns out in humans, what is the most basic sex, the most basic gender? Female. So if you either don't have testosterone or you don't have working receptors for testosterone, no matter what chromosomes you have, what do you become? At least on the outside. Female. So she was born looking like a woman. Now here's the thing. You might just put yourself in this scenario. You've been a girl your whole life. You thought. Doctors thought you were, parents thought you were, they put you in dresses, played with dolls, did all that. Good, maybe 14, 15, 16, your cycle never starts. Eventually you become concerned. You go to the doctor. Gynecologist. He starts to do an exam on you. Gets a weird look on his face. What's inside this person? What's not inside this person? Outside, everything looks normal. Inside, number one, he notices there's no uterus. A little further up, he notices there's no ovaries. By this time, he's probably got out an ultrasound machine, and he's scanning the abdomen. And up there in the abdominal cavity, what does he find? Testes. Person's genetically XY. Those testes are making testosterone. But what's not happening with that testosterone, at least the way it should. If you're making testosterone, you should become a guy, right? But this person didn't, because those receptors are not picking it up the way they should. The message is there, but it's not really being answered the way it ought to be answered. It's like, anybody watch the Andy Griffith Show? You know, back in the day, when you called somebody, what happened if you called and go to first? Went to an operator, and the operator had to literally plug the line in from your phone to the person's phone that you wanted to talk to. Well, it's like that operator plugging it into the wrong line. The message is there. It's just not being picked up on the right side of the coin. It's not quite getting there. What do they do for people like this typically, who've been a female their whole life, and then find out at like 16 or 17, hey, I'm a guy? What happens? Take out the testes, and then do what from there? No, no plastic uterus. No, don't go there. No uterus. They're never going to have a uterus. What chemical what message might they want to send to that person's body? What messages are your body sending that make you look feminine? Estrogen, okay? So they start giving injections of estrogen to these people. Does Alex here, does he have estrogen receptors? Yeah, he just doesn't have what? Hopefully he doesn't have much estrogen, right? You don't. Okay, good. If Alex decided that he wanted to start shooting up estrogen, you're not even thinking about that, are you, Alex? If he was thinking about that, what would happen to Alex? What is the message estrogen sends to the body? Let's say to your fat cells. What's the message estrogen sends to fat cells in certain parts of the body? Deposit more fat. So Alex will begin to do that. Alex will become a little curvy. And the more estrogen he took, the curvier he would get. So you're not thinking about it, right? Yes, sir. Okay, just making sure. But they could be women on estrogen. Before the estrogen, they look like a girl, but a girl who never hit puberty. So they put her on estrogen. She begins to look like a normal girl. So she's never going to have a cycle. Never going to be able to get pregnant. But one of you guys could marry this person, and you never know unless she told you. Right? You marry a guy, I never know. I mean, there would be some weird things going on. You'd never have cycles, there'd be no PMS, that'd be a good thing, right? Could get pregnant, but unless she told you what was going on, you probably would never know. Now, this Olympic athlete, I don't think she had any of this done. I don't think she had the testes removed. She definitely wasn't taking estrogen. So here's the deal with that. Put yourself in one of these women who is running against this one. Put yourself in the place. There's different grades of this condition. Sometimes the receptors are completely messed up, and even though there's testosterone, none of it's picked up, and it's like it's not there to begin with. That apparently is not what was going on in this lady. Apparently some of her receptors for testosterone are working. Not enough to make her look like a man, but enough to make her be like really muscular, really strong, really fast. It's sort of like a woman on what? Steroids, but natural. She's not pumping steroids, she's making steroids. Put yourself in the place of a woman having run against her. Yeah, but I think she could have.
They still would have lost.
I think she lost on purpose, and I'll tell you why in a second. I watched the race. I think she lost on purpose. If you've been training your whole life to run this 800-meter dash, working 10 to 12 hours a day, lifting weights, running, you're a woman, and all of a sudden you find out you're running against a guy. That'd be really hard. Now, it's also unfair to her because she can't run against the guys because testosterone's not working full on for her like it should. She can't help it, but what did the Olympic Committee end up doing? They let her run against the women. And anybody watch the race? Like you did. She started out really slow. 800 meters is 2 laps around the track, right? It's like half a mile, close to half a mile. She was like, after 1 lap, she was way in last place. After a lap and a half, way in last place. Then she started running. What happened? She passed everybody on the track like they were standing still, except the first place person who was so far out she could catch him. I think she probably lost on purpose. Because she knew if she won, what was going to happen. People were going to really be complaining, there was going to be crazy amounts of controversy, and everybody was going to yell, it's not fair. She was definitely the fastest person on the track that day. Just really, so I think she really tried. But that kind of weird stuff we'll run into in biology a lot. I want you to think about hormones and receptors. Hormones are messages. Without a proper receptor, that hormone can't get that message to where it goes. The message a hormone is sending is for a cell to do something. Maybe make another protein, grow, turn some process on, turn some process off. Hormones, though, are messages that your body is sending. Testosterone. Where in your body are cells that have receptors for testosterone? Muscles. You go. Where else does testosterone change things at? Not obviously reproductive parts, but reproductive parts, vocal cords, body hair, facial hair, belly grow. Where else? So you girls are going to have a hard time believing this. Us guys, we think differently than you do. And part of that has to do with testosterone. It changes the way our brain is structured. Estrogen does similar things either. It's a message. It's changing the architecture of our body. Hormones are messages. Without a proper receptor, that message doesn't get through. You guys know what a pygmy is? Well, I'm talking about a pygmy human. Very, very short people. Basically a race of very, very small people. What? Where are they at? Really, really small. Why are they so small? What message in your body tells you you ought to grow? And what hormone does the pituitary gland put out that says it's off? What's the name for it? You've all heard of it. It's called the growth hormone. Human growth hormone. They have human growth hormone. They have a pituitary gland that's working just fine. But what's messed up? They're receptors for growth hormone. So they stay abnormally short. They're not midgets. They're different from midgets. And I'm using politically incorrect terminology here. Little people, let's say that. Okay? They're different from little people. Because you know, with a person who's a midget, let's just go with that term because you know what we're talking about. You're not in the right proportion, right? It's obvious that something's going on there. The proportions are off. With a pygmy, the proportions are normal. It's just like if somebody took you and shrunk you with a shrink ray, and you just shrink down and check your proportions. But it's a problem with the receptors for growth hormone. Hormones can't work. The message can't get there if the receptors don't work right.
Can I do anything about that?
No. It's a genetic condition. So the receptors are proteins. The genes where those proteins are off is just small. Not much you can do about it.
Really small?
Really small. I'm guessing, but you tell as for an adult.
It looks normal. They look like they grow and change from like
Just
a baby.
really small people. I actually saw a woman at the track meet on Saturday. Anybody at the track meet, cross country match? There was a woman there. Did you see her? She was maybe up to my waist. She looked like she was about 50. I would imagine she was, maybe not, she's not a pygmy, but she had something very similar. She had dwarfism, but it wasn't like a midget. She was the right proportions.
My nephew is a midget, and then his wife is a midget, and they have 3 kids and then another one on the way. But the oldest one's a midget, and then their daughter is normal size, and she's already taller than her mom, she's like 6.
Yep.
And then the next one's a midget, but he's a different kind of midget, and they don't know the next one.
So they probably have 2 different kinds of genetic diseases, the 2 parents. Probably the most common form of dwarfism is called achondroplasia, and it's a dominant genetic disorder. I don't know about that. It's I'm just thinking about the height part. I don't know about the muscle part here. But we'll get into how all that works. Before we go, we still got a couple minutes here, guys. I want us to look at a picture. This is what a cell membrane probably actually looks like. This is called the fluid mosaic model of the cell membrane. Fluid, because the cell membrane, mostly phospholipids, is what? It's liquidy. It's kind of like vegetable oil. Vegetable oil are lipids, right? Phospholipids have somewhat similar consistency, probably a little thicker than vegetable oil. It's fluid. It's not solid. It can move. It can change shape. And then in art, what's a mosaic? Yeah, you take a bunch of different pieces and just sort of stick them together, right? That's what are the pieces that in the mosaic here? What's all the blue stuff in that picture? Proteins. Proteins embedded, stuck into a phospholipid bilayer. These things up here that stick out sort of like tree branches, these are our glycoproteins. And remember, those are like your name tags. They tell your immune system, hey, this is me, please don't kill me. They also can serve as receptors for hormones. This might be what we were calling what kind of protein? A channel, or maybe a transport protein. It lets some of those ions or big things in and out of the cell. This might be just a receptor for a specific hormone. There's no telling what that might do. But the point being, all these proteins give the cell membrane certain properties, certain functions that they wouldn't have without them. Because proteins make the cell do its job. And those proteins